Do you remember, Brian, who the wrestling promoter was based in Detroit, and he was associated with the Pfefer and Haft combination at the time, but he was the promoter for Michigan and based in Detroit in the 1930s. Do you remember his name?
Oh, I'm forgetting the name, though.
Would it help if I reminded you he was a cousin of a famous movie star?
No, at this very second, it would not help me.
Deep cut. Yay, I got him. Adam Weissmuller.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I actually
And
never,
Adam
I never
Weissmuller.
knew. I know the name. Obviously, I know Johnny Weissmuller, but I've seen the name for the wrestling promoter. I just never realized they were related.
They were cousins.
Huh.
And apparently, Johnny Weissmuller's grandson is named Adam. One would possibly imagine from this guy. And for the kids, you can Google him if you care. But briefly, Johnny Weissmuller was a 4 or 5-time gold medalist in the 1924 and 1928 Olympics in swimming for the United States. And he ended up being cast as Tarzan in MGM's first big budget Tarzan the Ape Man, 1932, which was such a hit. He played the part in the spinoffs for the next 16 years and was synonymous. That was the most famous run of Tarzan movies. They used to have Tarzan Theater on Channel 11 here in Louisville every Saturday afternoon, I think at 2:00. And they would alternate that with, oh my God, who else was it? I can't remember now. 6 months you'd get Tarzan and 6 months you get somebody else, whatever. But okay, Brian, count these. Can I list from memory the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies? 1932, Tarzan the Ape Man. 1934, Tarzan and His Mate. 1936, Tarzan Escapes. 1939, Tarzan Finds a Son. 1941, Tarzan's Secret Treasure. 1942, Tarzan's New York Adventure. 1943, Tarzan Triumphs. I can't remember if there was, I think 44, he was a mystery of some kind. And then Tarzan and the Amazons, Tarzan and the Leopard Woman, Tarzan and the Huntress, and Tarzan and the Mermaids in 1948.
That's 12.
So in 16 years, he did 12 Tarzan movies. He's the most famous fucking Tarzan in the history of movies. And, but meanwhile, his cousin, as I said, had been the wrestling promoter in Detroit, and I looked him up. He died of cancer at 37 years old in 1937. So I found, because Pfefer was involved in sending the talent to Michigan along with Al Haft from Ohio, he got a box office report. Was just random in one of these files. It's chaos, even if you kind of have an idea what you're looking for. But it's the gross for all the wrestling shows, apparently in the state of Michigan, for like a 5-day period in 1936. Would you like to hear this?
Absolutely. Does it also say who was there?
No, it's just it's a ledger book.
Huh.
With date 16 Detroit, 16 Flint, 16 Windsor, 17 Hazelton, that type of thing. And the net, it says the net. And then the only town that has an expense and a profit is Detroit, because Weissmuller handled that directly. And the rest of it was local promoters. So it has a booking fee that the office got. And I mean, every one of these promoters had different ways of writing this down. And I'm not an accountant, but also there were questions of literacy and sometimes English being a first language when a lot of these guys were doing their records. So everybody did things differently, but we could extrapolate some things.
When was this in 1936?
This was the week of March 16, 1936. And actually, it covers the days of March 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. Those are the only days that are covered. Apparently, those are the only days that ran shows, but there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 shows during those 5 days out of this office. On the 16th, and Detroit was obviously even still then and remember, this is in the Depression, right? So, God damn it, I had a note jotted down here somewhere, but in 1936, I believe you can figure that $1 is equal to like $22 or $23, something like what it was today, or what it is today. But Detroit at the time, Weissmuller was running a building called the Arena Gardens, but the big events would go to the Olympia Stadium, which was not a outdoor stadium as the name sounds, but the Olympia was the building that Bruiser ran opposite Sheik when he ran the Cobo, and I think it later became the Joe Louis Arena that Crockett ran. It was around initially from the 20s or early 30s. And the ticket prices at this time, they were doing, if they would do during this time period, 4,000 fans in Detroit, the gate would be like $30-something, $3,800 or $4,200. So you can assume that the tickets were like 50, 75 cents at $1, something like that for a lot of these shows, right? But this is 1936. So on this particular week, Detroit, the net, and I don't know how they arrived at that figure, but the net was $1,299.97. And then out from it is expense, $1,093, and profit, $206.92, but the office kicked back a booking fee to themselves of $65.
How does
now,
that
this
work?
sounds
How does that work for the listeners when you kick back a booking fee, but you're the booker?
Well, that's the thing, is the office gets to take a booking fee out of, and in those days, each town had a local promoter that would have to pay the office a certain percentage of the gate in order for that booking office to supply them with the wrestling talent for their card. If I'm over in Lansing, Michigan, I can't bring wrestlers from around the country in, even back then or whenever, for just to run Lansing. I can't afford to keep a crew. So I go to a booking office that services the whole area, which in this case would have been Detroit. And I got to pay them 10% usually is what it was. But back in these days, who knows? And probably everybody had a different deal at some point. And so then they'll book me the talent and I promote the show and I pay the building, I pay the advertising, I pay the boys, I pay the booking fee, and I hope to God that I got something left over. But when the promoter also owns the booking office, he can write as an expense off of his own show booking fee and put it back in his goddamn company's account. And see, again, I don't, this might have been involved in, or might not, because it's a separate column, in expense of the show, but he's basically showing a profit of $206.92, which again, today would be somewhere around $5,000. But the more interesting thing is, I'm not going to read all these amounts to you, but I want to read you the towns and then the total. Because all these other towns that they were booking talent out to were drawing between, Owasso. I'm not even sure where Owasso is. Is there an Owasso, Michigan? Because its net was $181. Now, that would be like doing a $4,000 spot show, today. But it's still, with tickets not even $1 across the board, they're drawing several hundred people. They're from $200 to $600 in these other towns. Flint, Michigan, Windsor, Ontario, Hazel Park, Lansing, Deutsches Haus, I don't know if that's a building name or what, Owasso, Alpena, Pontiac, Michigan, Muskegon, Ypsilanti, Monroe, Grand Rapids, Flint, Dearborn, and Lakeshore. They had, in those 5 days, live wrestling events in all those different towns that were drawing anywhere from 200 to, up to 1,500 people or whatever it was in Detroit. And the total gates of all of that 5 days is $6,500, which still doesn't sound incredibly, impressive now until you realize that's almost $150,000 today. In 1936, you could buy 4 or 5 brand new cars for $6,500. The average family income per year was like a third of that. So putting in perspective, I don't have the map in front of me, but I recognize most of those towns. You weren't leaving Detroit and going farther than 150 miles and running all with no television, just all those little buildings and all those places, and with crews of wrestlers.
Yeah, all those auto workers.
There you go. And so when you're talking about in a week, that little local territory with no television and trips not that long could gross the equivalent of $150,000 in 5 days, $150,000 today. Is just fascinating to me.
I just found some research that Tim Hornbaker did. It's on his old website, legacyofwrestling.com. From right after this period of time. In the Wednesday, April 1st, 1936 edition of the Detroit News, it was stated that Michigan Wrestling and Boxing Commission Chairman James M. Bingo Brown has suspended the new heavyweight champion Dick Schickat from appearing in this state for his failure to appear for scheduled matches in Tennessee and Indiana. Michigan had a working agreement with those two states. Schickat was scheduled to make an appearance in Detroit Monday, but because of his runouts, will not be allowed to wrestle here. He is under contract to promoter Adam Weissmuller for Michigan. Schickat was scheduled to wrestle John Leon Gradovich at the Arena Gardens on Monday. The paper also indicated that there was a battle between promoters. The suspension of Schickat was interpreted in wrestling circles as an exchange of blows between the two rival Detroit wrestling promoters, Weissmuller and Nick Londos.
And by the way, Nick Londos was not related to Jim Londos.
No, different spelling, E-S as opposed to O-S.
Just for the kids.
As well as punches between the group known as the Wrestling Trust and a lesser band of performers controlled by Al Haft of Columbus, Ohio, and Weissmuller of Detroit. Schickat jumped to the Haft-Weissmuller booking agency, a minor league trust, after Dano O'Mahony quit to him in New York. Until that match, Schickat's appearances were handled through the booking agencies controlled by Jack Hurley in New York, Paul Bowser in Boston, Ed White in Chicago, Tom Pax in St. Louis, and Londos in Detroit. Londos was a member of this trust. So I'll stop there for a second before I go to the other interesting thing here about this period of time, but there it is. I mean, do you even say that's outlaw? Was it outlaw at that time, or he's running against the Wrestling Trust? That's the NWA without the name. It's the NWA. Well, it's that model.
Well, no, not even, because you can't say anything was really outlaw. Well, yeah, there's some promoters had been at a particular spot for quite some time and others would try to come in and fuck them around. But for the most part, there was no outlaw promotions of that period of time because so many allegiances changed, or sometimes a promoter had no choice. If the booking agent cut him off because he got in with somebody they didn't like, he'd have to go to somebody else for it. So they were all jumping back and forth. And Ray Fabiani would be promoting Philadelphia in 1940, and suddenly he's at the Olympic Auditorium, and the promoter matchmaker there in 41. They just went everywhere. And so there's really no outlaw type of thing, but you've got something else there. And then you mentioned Ed White. I'll bring him back up.
Yeah, there's a couple more interesting things about this. And again, I've never looked into this before, so this is all fascinating. On Thursday, April 2nd, 1936, the Michigan State Boxing and Wrestling Commission ruled that Shikat could fulfill his contract obligation in Detroit on Monday. On Saturday, April 4th, Nick Landis declared himself for gymnasium tournaments to restore the grunt and groan profession to its former high standard by eliminating gorillas, mustached fakers, bearded beasts, and small fry wrestlers, according to the Detroit News. So he's not taking to this too well. I did that shit.
No.
Gonna wrestle there.
Well, that's because that's Pfefer's guys. Pfefer was known for the mustached guys and the freaks and the weirdos and the blah 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 and the gimmicks. And so he's declaring that he'll face any of them in the local gym for real to settle goddamn who's the best.
He said he had requested the National Wrestling Association to sanction a professional tournament to be held in Detroit from now until we clean out the fakers. That's a quote. Landis said he had suggested a tournament with matches held weekly among wrestlers who think they could last 10 minutes in a gym workout with some of the present-day chieftains. He believed the tournament would push aside these man-eating monsters, the type that is disgusting the fans. Instead of naming names, he mentioned the chair-smashing, eye-poking palookas whose crowd appeal depends on such stunts as eating spectators' straw hats and slugging referees.
Chief Chuchki.
Among the wrestlers Landis named as being those who could make, quote, any of the riffraff class say uncle were O'Mahony, Jim Londos, Ray Steele, Strangler Lewis, Gus Sonnenberg, Jim McMillan, Man Mountain Dean, the Dusick brothers, Hans Kampfer, Hans Stanky, Ray Richards, Fred Grumbier, Leo Numa.
Fred Grubmeyer misspelled.
Excuse me, Fred Grubmeyer, Leo Numa, Vincent Lopez, George Zaharias, Cliff Olson, and Everett Marshall.
Jesus Christ, how did Dean get in there? He couldn't put a fucking wrist lock on his own fucking wrist.
Weissmuller was called for comment and said, quote, thank him for me for the blast. He added that it was great publicity for his Monday show, actually hoping that he would do it again before press time. So Adam Weissmuller was really going back and forth with them, but it leads to this card here. Detroit, Michigan, Monday, April 6, 1936. Shikat beats John Leo Grandovich. Ali Baba beat Al George. Ivan Rasputin and Hans Schnabel went to a draw. Walter Podolnik beat Frank Malkowitz.
Podolak. He would be the golden Superman.
Babyface Nelson beat Murray Warham. Jose Manuel beat Mike Kolanis. Adam Weissmuller was the promoter. The referee, Vern Clark. 3,543 fans. Gate, $4,419.65. It is said to be the second largest crowd in Weissmuller's experience as a promoter here. The previous record was Landis versus Orville Brown, which did $21,168.
Jesus. And in the early 30s, because that was Landis's best period. So that would be.
Yeah, what's $21,000 then? Yeah, really. Oh my God.
I can tell you that my inflation calculator notes only go back to 1940. $1, it would be worth $23 today. So $20,000 times 25 or so, whatever the case. But you mentioned Ed White, who was the promoter in Chicago that promoted the big shows that Landis had done in Chicago, and that everything before the the late 40s Fred Kohler era, right?
Yeah, and by the way, $21,000 in 1930, let's say, would be over $405,000 today.
Actually, here's something. Look at 1935. Because of the way that they do the inflation calculator, it's related to purchasing power.
494,000. Wow.
The Depression, everything was devalued. Before and 1930 was the start of it, but you go back in the late 20s, in Madison Square Garden, the wrestling promoters in the 1920s were charging up to $10 or $12 for a ringside ticket. And that didn't come back in until the 60s again. Because of the roaring 20s, things were not, as tight as they would be. And it took the 30s and 40s for that period of time for it to adjust up to what it once was. Some things never did.